Well, good day. My name is Dan Duncan, and I'm Vice President for Impact Strategies at Community Technology, Inc., located in Austin, Texas. We are a company that provides online software for nonprofits and funders to help manage their outcomes and results, as well as their grant management processes. And I joined CTK last year after more than 30 years as a human service professional, primarily in the United Way world. So I've done a lot of work in outcomes and in neighborhood development and community development work, and so I'm going to give the webinar today to kind of give you a sense of best practices in outcomes reporting. So I really want to thank you all for joining us today. I will give you a number of opportunities during the webinar to ask any questions that you may have as we go through the process. So let's start. And again, I want to start with a couple polls just to see who is on the call and the kind of sort of experience you have related to outcomes. So the first question I'd like to ask is your organization a funder or a service provider? So please go ahead and answer the questions. Okay, looks like everybody today is a service provider, so thank you very much. Here are the results. Again, we may have some others joining us during the webinar. And the second question, does your agency currently have an outcomes reporting framework? Okay, so thank you very much for all voting. And it looks like about 63% said yes and 38% said no. And then the final question is, if you have a framework, where is your agency on the outcomes tracking continuum? Just starting, in the murky middle, or a system in place but looking to improve? All right, looks like everybody has voted. So, and here are the results. Again, 33% just starting, and about another 2/3 system in place but looking to improve. So thank you very much for that opportunity to share that information. Now moving kind of why outcomes reporting. Just a couple slides about that to set the stage. And again, most of you, the reason you're here on the webinar is because you understand the importance. But Elizabeth Shore from Harvard University, who's one of the real experts on helping design programs that work and make a difference and change lives, highlights a couple lessons from her experience about what are some things that really work. And for her, first of all, be clear about the purpose of our work, the outcomes we're trying to achieve. So it's very clear that we need to know where we're going as we begin to do this work. And the second one is to be willing to be held accountable for achieving those purposes. So again, that fits right into the outcomes reporting framework, that we have to be clear about what our purposes are, and we have to be willing to be held accountable. She also goes on and talks about the importance of partnerships, because no one institution or organization can do it alone. It does take collaborations and partnerships. And we have to look at ways to move audaciously into the world beyond programs of how can we change the environment and engage people that we serve in the programs and take community-wide responsibility. But the keys for today's webinar is really that we all have to be clear about our purposes for our work, and we have to be willing to be held accountable for our work. The second kind of thing that really drives my thinking around this work is the whole issue. All right, if you could please remember to put your phones on mute, if you could, thank you. Again, kind of reminding all of us that we live in a very complex world. So if you begin to look at, and this is a book called Getting to Maybe, How the World Has Changed. It's just an amazing book, and one of the things they talk about is how does change occur in the real world? How do outcomes or results occur? And one of the things they talk about is that there is a difference between simple, complicated, and complex problems. Simple problems are like baking a cake. If you have a small recipe or a short recipe, a few ingredients, you put them in. If you follow the recipe, you can, in fact, cook a very nice or bake a very nice cake. The second kind of problem are complicated problems, things like going to the moon, sending a rocket to the moon. Again, very much more complicated, but still the same thing. You follow the recipe, you follow the plan, and you'll get to the moon because all of the variables always act the same way every time. The third kind of problem is a complex problem, like raising a child. And we all know you can do exactly the same thing with two children in your family, and they will turn out very different. That's because the variables don't always act the same way. And we have the same issue in the health and human service world that we work in, that we have to be able to respond to those mid-course corrections, and we need data and information if we are going to make those corrections so that we can fine-tune our programs to get the results that we want to get. Because we can't do exactly the same thing for every client and assume that they're all going to come out the same way because of the differences of variables and their life experiences and their environment. And that's why we deal in a complex world, and that's why it's so important that we have data and information to help us make those changes and those mid-course corrections as we move through the process. So we need that timely data and information to make the mid-course corrections. So collecting data, what is relevant to outcome-based reporting? Key definitions. One of the key things we want to start with are some key definitions so that we start with a common language. That's one of the problems that we sometimes have in dealing with different funders or dealing with different partners, is that we're all using different language or different definitions for the same things. So one of the things I want to start this webinar with is really discussing what are some of the common language issues that we can focus on. And the first one is outcomes reporting. What is outcomes reporting? And I define it as a systematic data gathering process implemented throughout an organization to provide the information necessary to define project success, track activities and results, and make the informed decisions necessary to improve programs and outcomes. And just to remind you all, we will be sending you a copy of these slides at the end of the webinar, so you will have access to these slides. So that is outcomes reporting. Again, a systematic data gathering process to help drive your change and your results. So outcomes reporting provides the information necessary to define your success. Again, going back to Elizabeth Shore's work, understand the components and processes of success, prove program project success, make informed decisions about future programming and resource allocation, and finally, eventually, hopefully, to allow everybody to qualify for more and larger grants, because you do in fact have an outcomes reporting framework in place. So the second definition is a community-wide impact strategy statement. As you may have noticed, many funders, if not most funders today, whether they're United Ways or governmental entities or foundations, are focusing on a key issue or two, because funders have really realized that they cannot make a huge difference if they're trying to be all things for all people. They have to become focused. So many funders today have developed a community-wide long-term strategy that includes the relevant population and the results in a quality of life-based statement. So they've again identified things like all children need and deserve lifelong connections to a safe and caring family, or promoting community-wide wellness, or those of you that are funded by United Way, they may be focused on education, income, and health, and some of those key issues around high school graduation or income for families. So most funders today are becoming much more focused. So in your grants, you have to, and when you submit proposals, you have to respond to what is their community-wide impact strategy as you move forward. So it's important to understand that. But it's also important to understand the difference between community-wide data and agency outcome data, because there is a key difference, and most funders have realized that the community-wide outcomes and indicators, that is not just rolled up from your work of service providers, but those indicators at the community-wide level are collected from community-wide data sources like the school district relative to dropout rates, or the census data relative to income levels, and those kinds of things. You cannot just roll up individual agency results into those community-wide indicators, because in individual agencies, those of you that are individual agencies, you should not and cannot be held accountable for changes in that overall community-wide result. So if the funder is focused on graduation rates or reducing dropouts, you cannot be held responsible individually for changing that community-wide dropout rate, but you can and must be held accountable for the results of your program. So if you're working with 100 kids and your job is to keep them in school and not have them drop out, then you do need to track whether they stay in school, whether they drop out or not, and you should and must be held accountable for those results. So if you said 80% of our kids are not going to drop out, are going to stay in school during the year we work with them in the program, then that you need to be held accountable to that, and I know you would want to be as you move forward. But just to be clear, from my perspective as a funder for a lot of years, we have to be cognizant that we should not try to hold individual agencies responsible for those community-wide outcomes. It takes many agencies, many activities to turn those curves or to change those outcomes at a community-wide level. So I think this is helpful for both funders and agencies to understand that agencies need to be held accountable for their work and be part of a coalition or a collaboration that is working collectively to potentially change community-wide outcomes, but they should not be held individually accountable for driving those, and you should not just roll up individual agency results into those community-wide indicators. The next definition is outputs, and outputs measure the magnitude of the activities of an agency's program or service. So you're tracking the number of people served, the number of hours of services provided, and the amount of resources provided. Again, this does not tell you anything about the outcome or the results of a program. It just talks about the magnitude of a program, and I'll talk a little bit about that later as we move through this webinar. The second one, again, sample outputs, number of youth participating in the after-school program, hours of counseling provided, the amount of emergency assistance provided during the year. Again, all examples of outputs. Outcomes, the real key, and again, this of our work, and this is why we do the work in the health and human service world, is because we are trying to change behaviors, attitudes, knowledge, or circumstances for individuals or populations as a direct result of participating in an agency's program. So outcomes are changes in behavior, attitude, knowledge, or circumstances. Again, sample, permanent housing for homeless individuals, more youth graduating from high school. So those are examples of outcomes that we're trying to achieve in a program. But again, they don't look at numbers. That's just the outcome, what we're trying to achieve, what is the goal of the program. The second one is indicators. The next definition is indicators, which is a measure which helps quantify an output or outcome. Indicators are definable, quantifiable, measurable, and collectible. So one of the things you have to do with indicators is to begin to identify, how am I going to know how many people I'm serving? How am I going to know how many units of service? How am I going to know that people have and how can I measure that they have a change in attitude or behavior or circumstance? So you have to begin to look at ways that you can measure those things. So again, sample indicators would be number of youth in the program, number of hours of counseling, or the number or percent of program participants who will successfully acquire permanent housing. So again, indicators are the measures that you're going to use to tell whether you are, how productive you are relative to your outputs, and whether you are in fact achieving your outcomes or not. Finally, targets. These are the actual goals set for each program or service's outputs and outcomes. So again, the number of clients or units of service projected to be served, and the number and percent of your clients that will achieve the identified outcome. Sample targets: 1,245 youth will participate in the program, 45 hours of counseling will be provided during the year, or 80% of program participants will successfully acquire permanent housing. As I highlighted, I was a funder for many years, so one of the things I wanted to highlight is that from a funder's perspective, 80%, 60%, 75% are good numbers from our perspective. We really don't like to see an agency that says 100% of our clients will be successful, because what that potentially tells us as funders is that you're not dealing with the toughest clients, or the clients that really need your help the most. So it's okay to say that 100% of our families, or 100% of our clients, our customers, our students, whatever that is, it's okay to say not 100%, but to really look realistically, because again, it's a complex world. And if we have a program that's getting 100% success rate, as a funder, we would tend to believe that you were enrolling people in the program that didn't need your program in the first place, because we are dealing in a complex world. And so we want to make sure that you are in fact reaching the hardest to reach, the most clients that are in need, if you will. And so as you begin to look at what is your success rate, you have to take those issues of the environment and the complexity of people's lives into account. So a 65, 75, 80% success rate really could be a very good success rate depending on the program that you are offering and the people that you're serving. So let me stop there. and see if there are any questions or comments about the first part of this webinar relative to the definitions, the common definitions of outcomes and outputs and indicators and goals and targets.
Clarify the difference between indicators and targets?
Oh, absolutely. Be glad to do that. An indicator is the thing you're going to measure, whether that's number of people served or percent of clients that move into housing or are sober for 6 months or whatever that may be. So the indicator is how you're going to measure that. The target is the actual goal that you're setting, the goal itself. 80% of our clients will do better. We're going to serve 2,000 youth in this program this year. So that's the difference. The indicator is just how you're measuring it. What is the information you're going to collect to measure it? And the target is the actual goal you're going to set during the year or during the funding cycle. Does that make sense? Okay, any other questions or thoughts? Okay, well then we'll go ahead and move forward. Again, please remember to keep your phones on mute during the webinar unless you do want to ask a specific question or make a comment. So finding areas of reporting through data analysis. You know, there are three critical questions you need to ask as you begin to look at how are we going to create this outcomes framework or this data system of providing us the information we need to make the mid-course corrections. And I believe there are three key questions that we have to be able to answer. The first one is, how productive are we? The second one is, are we doing things right? And the third is, are we doing the right things? And this becomes the basis for outcome reporting. So based on some work from Mark Friedman and others, I've created this matrix that really makes it clear for me that if we have this matrix on the upper left corner, it's about quantity and effort, and quality and effort, and then effect, the impact we're having or the change we're making is the lower two quadrants. So the first quadrant is how productive we are. We need to be able to know, to make decisions as an agency around resource allocation and those kinds of things. How many people are we projecting to serve, and how many activities are we going to provide? Are we going to serve 100 people, or are we going to serve 1,000 people? Do we want to provide 1 hour of counseling for each, or do we want to provide 20 hours of counseling for each? So it becomes very critical that we know this, because that helps in the allocation of resources. It helps as we begin to look at what kind of funding or resources we need to raise to do our program based on how productive we are. So you should be able to have those, and that's why some people say, well, outputs versus outcomes, outputs aren't as important. Outputs are very important because they do set the stage for understanding the productivity of an organization, or the magnitude of the impact that the organization is trying to have. So that's the first quadrant up on the upper left, is the how productive we are. The second one is, the second question is, are we doing things right? This is where we begin to look at very clearly at client satisfaction, retention data, and are we following our protocols? If we have a process, if we have steps that we go through, are we going through those same steps? Do we have that flexibility so we can respond to that because we have our framework? Client satisfaction is also important, particularly as it relates to retention data. I'm a firm believer that many programs, we know that there are a lot of great programs. You all offer many programs that really work well. But one of the things we know is that if people aren't staying in your program long enough, they're not going to get the impact, the benefit of your program. This is particularly true in many youth-serving programs, whether that's mentoring programs, troop-based programs, all of those kinds of activities for kids. We do know that if kids stay in a program for a long time, they're going to get some good positive benefits from that program. But if they don't stay in the program long enough, then they won't receive those benefits. So it's important that you as an agency be able to track that retention data so you know how long somebody stays in your program. Because as a funder, again, if I look at an agency and they have a great program, but people only stay in their program for 2 months, 3 months, then as a funder, I know they're not going to have as big of an impact than if they stayed in the program a little longer. Now, unless, of course, the goal of the program is to get them in and out because of what you're doing. But in most youth-serving programs and other things like that, it takes a long-term commitment and a longer-term engagement to get the benefits of the program that you may have. So that's the second piece of that, is that we must measure, again, are we doing things right? But again, that doesn't tell us anything about the impact we could have, because you could have, again, a great program with very productive, following your protocols. So the next thing is, are we doing things right? Are we doing strategies that are in fact making a difference? And that's why it becomes so important to begin to look at now, what are our outcomes? How are we changing skills, knowledge, attitude, behavior, or circumstances, and be able to measure that and check that. So that's very important. And then the effect in quantity is just how many of our clients are in fact improving their skills, improving their knowledge, how many of our clients are changing their behavior or circumstances. And then the lower right quadrant is about the quality and effect, which tells us what percent. So if 80% of our clients are doing better, that tells us we're really doing something well. We need to make sure we continue to do the same thing, and in fact we could take it to a larger scale. So we could in fact impact more folks. And so as a funder, when an agency can really answer these four quadrants and have 70, 75, 80, 90% success rate with a program, as a funder, I would then be interested in investing more money in it so you could take it to a larger scale as you move forward. So these four quadrants really become the key ingredients then of how do you look at data in your organization so that you can identify how productive you are we doing things right, and are we doing the right things? So if you begin to look at answering those questions, it will really help you as you move forward in developing and improving your outcomes framework. So where do we start? How do we begin to do effective outcomes reporting? But before I do that, let me stop and see again if there are any questions about this quadrant. Does this resonate? Does this make some sense?
Question on going back to the retention data. You very briefly skipped over the in and out. And in our particular organization, we provide information, but we're not a clinic or something where we actually retain people unless they're live local for a support group. So what do you offer when retention is not one of your goals?
Well, if again retention is not one of your goals because of the type of program, then you'll have to look more at the client satisfaction. Are you following your protocols, and then the actual outcome and results of your intervention. If it's designed as a very short intervention, you need to do that. I was more kind of referring where retention becomes important is if you need somebody in a program to get the full benefits for a year, then it's very important that you be able to track how many of your clients are actually staying in your program for that full year.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So moving forward, effective outcomes reporting. Where do we start? First of all, being very clear about what is the mission of your organization. Again, looking at your board, looking at their decisions, their directions, their setting, as well as the mission of your organization. You have to be clear about what are those things that your mission is about and find ways to measure those. If your goal is to reduce homelessness, then what are you doing to have data that can help you do that? So it starts with the mission of your organization. That's particularly important so that agencies don't get into mission creep of doing more things that get beyond their mission or their purpose that they were established for. The second kind of area is identifying your funders, community-wide impact statement, and your agency's role. So again, if you are applying for funding from the city, from a state, from a foundation, United Way, then you have to be very clear about their community impact statement, their community-wide statement, and the role that you can play in that, and be able to identify some data and some outcome results or some information that will help you prove that you are in fact playing a role and an important role in the work that funder is doing. The third one is to look at potential donors' interest. Again, as you begin, if you're going to raise money from individuals or maybe from some foundations in your community, identifying what would be of interest to them, so that if there is an alignment, you can begin to collect some information that would align with their interest as you go forward. So those three set the stage, but the most important one is the last one, which is identifying the components of your program that you believe makes your program unique and successful. I really believe that this is the key to outcomes reporting, is for you as your agency and organization to take a look at what are the components of your program that you believe make your program unique and successful. And then look at how do we measure that unique part of our program, because we're competing with other organizations down the street, across the town, and we all feel as agencies that we do something unique. We do something different than that agency down the street or that agency across town. So how can we really be very clear about what makes our program unique as we move forward? So let me just give you an example of that. When I was in Indianapolis, at the United Way in Indianapolis, I was working with one agency that was a child care agency that was providing child care, and particularly infant child care, at this agency, and we were going through this process of identifying their outcomes reporting plan. And so one of the things they said, well, we just watch infants, so what can we possibly measure an outcome for infants, whether they turned over 3 months earlier than before, or what is the issue? And I said, no, that's not how I would approach it. What are those things that you do in your program that you think are unique than other infant child care programs in your community? And one of the things they said is that we do, I believe, what was called the Denver test, but a test for early developmental delays. So they test all of the infants when they come into their program to see if there are any potential developmental delays. And if it appears that there are some delays, then what they do is they tell the parents that they need to go get further testing and further consultation with a professional to see if there are any actual delays and what they can do about it. And so one of the questions I asked them, well, do you ever follow up and see if those families do in fact go and get that extra testing or consultation? And they said, no, we've never done that before. We've never thought of doing that. And I said, well, that's an example of something's unique that you have to be able to measure. Because you have to know, if we go and do these tests and then we tell the families, you have to know whether in fact that your consultation makes a difference. Because if 80% of the families do in fact follow through and get that additional testing, that additional consultation, that tells you you're potentially doing it right. So you want to make sure you codify all of the process, the procedures you're following, so when you hire a new staff person, they will follow that same protocol, so that the families will continue to follow through. But if you find out and you do a study and find out that only 20% of the families are following through, then that tells you that you're probably not doing it right, number one. So you need to change your protocols, or you're not addressing all of the barriers appropriately that are in the way, whether that's information, whether that's money, funding, whatever that is. So if you have this thing you do, this activity, and it's not making a difference, you need to change it, or identify barriers so you can change it, or you need to, and more importantly, if you find, not more importantly, but if you find that most of the families are in fact following through with this unique activity that you do, that this unique activity you're doing is in fact working, making a difference, then you want to make sure that you codify that so that you can continue to follow that procedure, still trying to fine-tune it so you can go from 80% to 85 to 90, but not losing the essence of it. So the biggest sort of recommendation I can make is take a look at your programs, all of the key components of your programs, to identify what are those things that you believe make your program unique and different and make your program successful, and making sure that you identify those indicators that you can utilize to measure whether those unique features of your program are in fact making a difference, changing behaviors, changing knowledge, attitudes, or conditions for the individuals that you serve. So as you begin to look at this as an organization, you may end up with a bit of data points, a bit of information that you have to collect, because you're looking at your mission to make sure you're meeting the needs of your board and your board's interest in what they think the organization's about, looking at any funders that you may have, potential donors, and then finally the uniqueness of your programs and services. How do we measure that so that we have the information we need to improve it? One of the next thing is again using technology or using things so that we can really tell this story. I'm just going to show some examples of how organizations have used this kind of information and reporting to help drive their results, help drive the development of their outcomes reporting schematic. And then I'll give some examples, again, ending up the webinar around how to take this information to really make a difference with your funders, and what are the best ways to tell the story to your funders as we move forward. So before I do that, let me just do another quick poll, if we could. So the final poll is your agency currently using outcome technology now to facilitate your outcome reporting? About everybody has voted. So I will close it, and we'll see that about almost half and half, 44% yes, 56% no. So again, just going to show you some examples of kind of outcomes reporting and how we can help do that. So the first one is, again, client demographics, being able to very easily track who you're serving. You certainly need to know that relative to age, relative to ethnicity, those kinds of things. So that's a good starting point. So you have, again, relative to the outputs and the productivity, knowing who you're serving. What is the age? Because that, again, you look at different kind of resource allocations depending on the age group of the individuals that you're serving, the ethnicity of people.
Can you change the slide, please? Because we're still getting poll results.
Oh, you are. I apologize. Thank you very much. There. Okay. So are you now? Thank you. So now, again, demographics, tracking, again, as I highlighted, you need to know your demographics, you need to know age, ethnicity of the individuals that you serve as you move forward. The other, again, looking at then progress. How do we track individual progress of clients? Here's a sample using, again, our online data manager system for an individual client that has 4 assessments, being able to track, are they in fact improving each time on that assessment? Whatever you've identified as your unique features, testing that to see, are they learning those new skills? And I'll show you some other examples of that in a few minutes. So again, individual client results are one of our other products for smaller United Ways, Apricot, highlighting the, again, if we know that people need what they need to do to move towards housing, are we in fact tracking that? Moving from achieving educational goals to addressing financial goals, incomes through benefits, etc. as we move forward. And then progress for all clients, being able to track everyone, all the clients in the program, and see how they're doing. Again, it's using graphs, charts, you can very quickly see the kind of things you're having to tell the story, whether that's to individual staff, to supervisors, as well as board and funders and donors as you move forward. Again, progress for all clients. If we have 50 individuals in this program and the goal is to get them in permanent apartments for 60 days, we know there's some key things they need to go through potentially. If they have an addiction problem, going to AA or NA. They need to apply for housing and furniture assistance. They need to locate and view the apartment. They need to submit the apartment application. They need to accept the apartment. They need to schedule the move-in, and then they need to see whether they are in fact staying after 60 days. So as you in a program identify these key milestones that your clients need to go through and achieve, this is a good way to track that and understand that. Again, client retention, as we talked about before, if we've highlighted that for the program, if you believe that your agency has to, or clients in your program need to stay a minimum of 4 months to get the benefits of your program, then you can very quickly look and see, okay, which of our clients are in fact achieving that 4-month goal and which of our clients aren't. So you can begin to look at what happened with Bob, Sally, Stacy, and Chris that they did not stay in the program. What were those factors? So what were those barriers that got in the way of them staying in the program? Because maybe we can find ways to address those barriers as we go forward. Again, program outcomes and aggregates, beginning to look at that. If, again, looking at those kinds of things so that we can track how many of our clients are moving through the processes that we need for our goals. And again, the agencies or the clients that successfully complete the program, being able to highlight that. This certainly would become helpful for funders to be able to show that 64% of our clients did actively complete the program successfully. You need to know that so that you can begin to drive your results and drive your outcomes as we move forward. And then again, outcome summary by agency or program. This could be used by a funder to track their results, or by individual agencies if these were individual programs. So you can very quickly see which program, which agency achieved their goals and which didn't. For example, in this case, an agency said serving 1,000 kids, 1,000 would do, or 1,000 of their kids would do better on their on a post-test, pre-post-test kind of situation. If you're doing that to learn new skills, you can very quickly see how each organization or each program of your agency did relative to those pre and post-test results. So that's what this is tracking. And then finally being able to dashboard your work. So you can put that on your website, putting it on in your annual report, putting it in funding proposals, whatever that may be, being able to tell that story. In this case, collectively, all of these programs actually exceeded their goals. And more, in this case, more youth actually did better on their post-test than they initially projected. So again, this gives you an example and a way to tell your story, both for, again, driving your internal data for the mid-course corrections that you need, as well as moving forward to and providing information to funders, to donors, to your board to tell the story of your success of your organization so that you can move forward. So let me now move to the kind of the final stage of this, and then we'll open it up for more questions and discussion as we go forward. So to appeal to funders by correctly reporting on outcomes, I'm going to give you some sense from myself as being an agency director at times, as well as a funder. What are some of the lessons that I learned throughout this process? Again, really focusing on that issue of what are the interest of potential funders, as well as the interest of potential donors. How do we tell our story as agencies effectively to help increase our funding or increase donations from our donors? The first one is communication power. Will funders and donors understand the data? One of the things that we can really do very easily is get into alphabet soup of all of our acronyms in the human service and the health world. We can get stuck in that, or we can get into these studies that may be too esoteric and don't really have strong communication power. Because what we want to do is make sure that funders understand what we're talking about. So if so again, doing the Ecker score or something like that doesn't make as much sense as kids reading at 4th grade reading level. People understand that. Kids not dropping out, kids graduating, families being able to have a median family income of X amount. People understand those things. So we have to be very clear as you look at all the data that you're doing that you are focusing on those things that have the largest communication power. You may know something that's very important, very critical, but if it doesn't have communication power, because it's really in our own language of human services or it doesn't communicate well, then don't use it. Focus on those items that really have strong communication power, that have some emotional connection, that people will understand it and really understand the difference that you're making because the communication power is so strong. The second one is, does it relate to the community-wide impact strategy or their interest? If they're focused on X, don't tell them about Y, because they won't see it, they won't hear it, and it won't be relevant. So be very clear that the results you're reporting has strong communication power and it relates to the strategy or the donor's interest. If the donor cares about education, don't start talking about health, because that's not what they're interested in. They're interested in education kinds of issues. The third key component of reporting the right data is that you do not need to report everything you do, because that will just destroy your communication power. It'll get too complex and too confusing. And partly for that, part of the real reason why it's okay to just report a few things is that data travels in herds. You've noticed if you're collecting maybe 10 things, they're probably all kind of going in the same way and indicating the same thing. So you don't have to report them all. Just find that one that has the most communication power or the data that's leading the herd. That data point that really, or that piece of information that really drives everything and is the lead horse in the herd, or the lead cow in the herd, however you think about that, so that you can create the data that is going to tell that most compelling story. You do not have to report everything to your funder, to your donor, to your board. But internally you may need those kinds of data. You may need to collect 10 different things because 10 of those relate to all those different unique strategies that you're doing. If you have unique strategies, you have to be able to test whether those individual strategies are working. But that data stays in-house. That data is just used by supervisors, by staff, by the leadership of the organization to make sure that they're allocating the resources in the right way, time and people in the right way, and making those so you can make a difference, or you can fine-tune those strategies that you're doing. But looking long term, or looking for your donors, you want to find just those 2 or 3 things that really can best tell the story. And finally, you want to make sure that you're collecting information that's easily collectible and replicable. You don't want to find things that are so hard or so expensive to track, or it's so much work for your staff that they're never going to do it, that you won't get good information. So you have to work hard to find out what is the easiest way, the simplest way I can collect information. And if it's too hard for my staff to collect, or if I have to pay an outside consultant to do it over time, then it's not going to be collectible and replicable long term. So again, from my experience, there are a whole host of easy, simple ways you can collect this information as you move forward. So as you begin to talk about how do I package my information to donors, to funders, and to internally, making sure that everything you have that you prepare and produce for those groups have communication power, relates to what they're interested in, and is not everything, just those key leaders of the herd, and is easily collectible and replicable. So let me stop there now, and we've got about 10 more minutes, so I will open it up for any questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions as we move forward. So again, please take your phones off mute now if you want to engage in a conversation among all of us for the last 10 minutes.
I have a question. Okay, we're talking about gathering the right data. And the problem that I run into is when I keep asking my 2 program officers to collect this data, they're going, we can't ask people questions like that. We don't want to pester them. We don't want to get too personal. How do you change the mindset so that you can actually collect some of this data?
Well, that's a great question. And I would highlight first that being very clear that the reason we have our agency, the reason we do these programs is because we are trying to change behavior, attitudes, conditions, or conditions or behavior. And because we're trying to change those, we have to be able to measure whether we've done that, because we can't improve our program. So as a staff person, we can't give you better tools to use if we don't know that we're not changing one of those 4 things. So you have to be very clear that we can't continue in business. We can't continue to get funding from agencies or donations from donors if we cannot prove that we're not achieving outcomes, changing behavior, attitudes, conditions, or knowledge. We have to be able to prove that. And so what is the easiest way, the best way that we can do that, and be very clear that if somebody engages with us as an agency, as a client, we really have an obligation to find out whether what we're doing is working or not. So the other thing I would highlight to your staff is we have to be able to know if what you're doing is actually making a difference. If we can't do that, we can't hold ourselves accountable. And in today's age, today's complex world, we have to be able to do that. So I think the key is if somebody comes in as a client into one of our agencies, we have to be very clear to them also from the upfront that the reason you're here is because we're trying to change your life in some positive way. We have to be able to measure that. The person that asked the question, did that help?
Yeah, it did. I mean, I can still see there's pushback, but it kind of gave me a different way to phrase what I'm trying to tell them, so maybe that'll be the magic.
Yeah, good. Yeah, the key is you're not trying to do it just because we want to tell a funder. It's not just because the funder said we had to. It's because we have a very unique program and service, and we need to be able to demonstrate why we're unique, why we're more unique, why we're more successful than the agency down the street potentially. And I don't mean that in a competitive way. I mean that in a way that if everybody is trying to do that, it's really going to improve the entire health and human service system, and that's good for all of us. Are there any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
A lot of times it asks for goals, and like I'm doing a report right now where it asks for goals and then it asks for estimated outcomes. How are they different? Because I feel like I'm kind of just regurgitating a lot of the same information.
Okay, great question. Typically, and again, that's where we get into that whole issue of common language and understanding the language of what we're trying to do. Outcomes is what the program is trying to achieve, whether that's getting folks, what does your agency do? if I could ask?
Credit counseling.
Credit counseling. So the outcome is that you want to increase people's knowledge of finances, of how to manage, how to budget, how to manage money more effectively, correct?
Correct.
Okay, that is the outcome. And potentially the indicators around that would be, are they increasing their credit scores? Are they opening a savings account and saving money? On a test, are they pre and post test, have they learned some new things about budgeting and managing money and using money effectively? Are they then saving money and potentially buying a home? Whatever those would be, all of those are indicators that you may want to do. So then your outcome or your goals would be 80% of our clients are going to open a savings account within 6 months and start saving some money. 75% of our clients are going to do better on a test relative to financial terms. 85% of our clients are going to establish a budget and follow it for 3 months. So those would be the goals. The outcome is what you're trying to achieve, which is improve financial literacy, improve financial management of your clients. The goals would be relative to those actual changes that you want to make in the percent or the number of clients that would do that.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So they're related, but just...
Yes, again, outcomes in of themselves typically do not have numbers attached to them. They are just what the reason for your program are, the outcomes, why we're doing this, what we're doing. The goals attach the numbers to them based on the indicators.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Again, we have a few more minutes. I'm glad to stay on, or we can end it early. So let me, while you're thinking of any other questions, I'll highlight again Community Technology in Austin, Texas. Technology with a Heart. We have a variety of products to help nonprofits track their outcomes and their results. You can visit our website at communitytech.net to find out about our products that may help you drive your impact work, improve your outcomes reporting. And if you have any questions, this is how you can contact me. Again, I'm Dan Duncan, Vice President Impact Strategies at CTK, and I will be sending this PowerPoint or these slides out to everyone at the conclusion of the webinar. You'll also be getting a survey, and we'd love it if you would give us your input to whether you found this survey, this seminar, this webinar helpful or not. And also looking for other topics that you may want us to do, because we're very interested in doing this on a regular basis to help nonprofits throughout the world, actually, make a greater difference for their communities and the people they serve. So did you find this webinar helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us today. I'm glad you did. And again, if you have any questions offline, please feel free to contact me at my email address or my phone number that you see on the screen. And everyone have a great day and a great Memorial Day weekend. And I hope all of you are away from the tornadoes and the terrible weather that the mid United States is going through right now. So thank you all very much and have a great day.